Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Gamecock Central Radio. Emerson Phillips joined by Wes Mitchell. We're taking a look at the South Carolina-Clemson game on Saturday night. Wes, we knew there was a talent gap between the Gamecocks and the Tigers, and it was really on display Saturday night. There's just no two ways about it.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. Emerson, the press conference after the game, Muschamp was asked several different questions about certain aspects of the game and why it went a certain way. And, he, on multiple occasions within the short 5 minutes, said, they have good players, or they have really good players. And, I thought that sort of this idea of, Muschamp's going to have to come in and recruit to rebuild the roster and, stack classes on top of classes, was just absolutely on full display, for what you can do by doing that and sort of what you have to do to match up Clemson. Because, I thought if you looked at the game, that basically Clemson just outmatched, out-talented, outmanned South Carolina in just about every way. And people can talk about a game plan, people can talk about, play calling, you can talk about any number of things. But if you're outmanned at the point of attack, meaning if Clemson's defensive front is getting pressure on you, they're stopping your run, they're able to get pressure rushing 3, at times. We're not even talking about rushing 4. If you can rush 3 and get pressure, then there's no play calling on the planet that can fix that. So, if you have that issue, and then on the other side, Clemson can just run the ball at will, basically, they're getting, 7 yards, 10 yards, 9 yards, just a clip, on that side. And there's really nothing you can do. So I thought Clemson probably played their best game of the season as far as being ready and coming out and executing. And I think we all knew for South Carolina to have any shot, Clemson was going to have to help them out a little bit. Clemson was going to have to play bad. So Clemson is kind of one of those things where South Carolina just ran into a buzzsaw. South Carolina didn't play their best. Clemson played their best game of the season. And, then – gosh, you talk about the play up front, but then you throw in the fact that Mike Williams may be the best receiver in the country. And if you're South Carolina, as Muschamp explained, you have to commit an extra defender to the box to have any thought of possibly slowing down the run. Well, once you do that, then you're leaving yourself on an island at times to the outside with Mike Williams. So there's really, you throw in that type of skill talent to try to defend it, on top of the fact that they're dominating you up front. That's just a complete recipe for disaster for South Carolina. So not only were they outmanned and out-talented, but it was just a horrible matchup for Carolina anyway.
Certainly was. Clemson with its most complete effort of the season. I don't think there's any disputing that. They outgained South Carolina 622 yards to 218, 40 first downs for Clemson to 14 for the Gamecocks. Clemson quarterbacks completed 29 of 35 passes. They threw for 372 yards in the ball game. Mike Williams caught 6 balls for 100 yards and 3 touchdowns. And it was really the running of Wayne Gallman early in the ball game that helped get the Clemson offense going. 19 carries for 112 yards for Wayne Gallman. So, Wes, I'm sure most folks listening today watched the game on Saturday night. No need to continue to go over all the numbers. It was obviously a lopsided game, 56-7 the final. And the Gamecocks now start to look to the big picture, Wes. And the upside is that it's just one loss. A lot of talk about that here in the aftermath of the game. It is just one loss. And even though it's a bitter pill to swallow, that does not change the fact that the Gamecocks are bowl-bound. And this young football team that is, roster laden with freshmen and sophomores gets an extra month of practice to prepare for the bowl game. And if Carolina can win that bowl, that would give them a winning record. And after last year's 3-9 campaign, that would be a real positive going into next year.
Yeah, and I think if you're South Carolina, be it players or coaches, you have to also use this game as motivation going forward. Because, I think we've all seen the improvement in the program. We all know, Muschamp and staff have been able to double the win total. But, we've seen the progress on the recruiting trail. But at the same time, I think a loss like this, also, if you're Muschamp and your staff, it makes you almost, even though you're improving, it makes you look at every single aspect of how you're doing things and say, is there something else we're missing? Is there anything else? This is a game that's going to cause some self evaluation, I think, as far as is there anything else we've changed to possibly make this progress come faster next year? Because sometimes you're moving forward, and because the overall program is going in the right direction, maybe you overlook a thing here, a thing there, and then a few years in, I think a guy like Butch Davis at Tennessee is a perfect example. They've recruited well, and they've become a more talented program, but there are still things that possibly were overlooked along the way because they were steadily improving that are still costing them games now that they do have the talent. So they're a better team, but when you face similar teams, then Tennessee has shown they can still get beat. If you're South Carolina, I think this loss makes you make sure that you've evaluated every aspect of the program this offseason so that when you do get the right talent in here, you're in place to do something with it. But, like you said, you sort of have to make sure you still see the forest and don't get blinded by the trees. This obviously was an ugly loss, but it doesn't really affect South Carolina in the big picture other than to be an example of, hey, there's been a lot of progress, but there's still a ways to go. And to me, it starts with the line play. That's something that has got to be fixed, starting with the offensive line, but obviously the defensive front as well. But if you get beat like South Carolina did up front, then it's not going to matter that you have a Jake Bentley. It's not going to matter that you have next year all your playmakers back on offense, and you add a Tyson Williams at running back. South Carolina will have the still talent to be a solid offense next year. But I think this game it serves as a reminder, the offensive line has got to get fixed. So, in some ways, this is a game that I think there's no way this game's a positive. I'm not remotely spinning that. But if you're South Carolina, you have to try to use this game as a motivation and to make areas of the program other than just, hey, we need more talent, that need to be improved.
Clemson's 11-1 now. They head to Orlando, Florida to take on Virginia Tech in the ACC championship game, and a Clemson win there will certainly put them into the college football playoff for the second year in a row. So Carolina falls to 6-6, and the Gamecocks now waiting to find out their bowl opponent and their bowl destination. Emerson Phillips with Wes Mitchell here on Gamecock Central Radio. We invite you to download the Gamecock Central Radio app. We've got this free phone app that allows you to listen to our podcasts on your cell phone, anywhere you receive cell phone service. It is a free app, and you can download it on the App Store and on Google Play. To subscribe to our podcast, search for Gamecock Central Radio on iTunes, SoundCloud, and other popular services, or visit radio.GamecockCentral.com. Wes, immediately after the game, Gamecock coaches said about recruiting immediately after the game. Muschamp has said repeatedly that recruiting will be the way out of this hole that the Gamecocks have been in the last couple of years, and there were pictures on the internet this weekend, on Sunday, in fact, Gamecock coaches in the homes of a number of recruits, including Jamias Williams, the cornerback out of Georgia. Travaris Robinson was in his home this weekend, and Gamecock coaches getting busy recruiting right after the game, Wes.
Yeah, Muschamp hit on that a couple of different times in the press conference as well. And that's what South Carolina's got to do, and they put the actions behind those words. They were immediately out on Sunday. Jamias Williams, I think you look at South Carolina's needs. They've got needs all over, obviously, but one of the best defensive backs in the country. He's someone that will absolutely play right away. And South Carolina needs depth in the secondary as well. So this it's very, very important for them to fill a bunch of those holes in the secondary, and he's a big part of that. So it seems like, just from the looks of things, that the staff has hit their committed guys for the most part first, as in, let's get out there and make sure these guys know just how important they are to the calls. Make sure they know, you're still being recruited like you're uncommitted, even though you're committed. See all the committed guys, check in on them, and then circle back and start seeing all the top uncommitted guys that they're going after. But seeing the committed guys has certainly been a priority so far, just based on the way it appears they're attacking this thing.
All right, Wes, do you feel like this game sort of indoctrinated Muschamp and this new staff and a lot of these young players that the Gamecocks have got to the South Carolina-Clemson rivalry?
Yeah, I think that that was a night that I think those players and those coaches will not soon forget. And it was an absolute dismantling. Clemson showed how far off South Carolina is. The Gamecocks ran into a buzzsaw on that given night. But, if you're South Carolina, like I said, you have to find some way to use it as motivation to try and sort of take another step as a program. And you know what? People are going to have to be realistic. It's going to take time. We all saw the gap. And, granted, I've seen a little bit of sentiment like, well, how did South Carolina keep it close last year and get blown out this year? Well, I always thought one of Steve Spurrier's best lines was every game stands on its own merit. So, any given day, Clemson turned the ball over last year. South Carolina was at home. They got some momentum and made it a football game. In the case of the game this past Saturday, Clemson's at home. They jump on South Carolina early, and the game's over before it really even starts. So, if you look at it, you can't really compare one year to the next, but you do just have to look at this game and say, South Carolina, still a long, long ways to go. I thought when you look at the talent difference with South Carolina and Florida a few weeks ago, and now South Carolina and Clemson, while there's been progress and there's a bunch of young players that are going to be really good one day, those guys obviously were inexperienced as well. So, I think in the long run, you want for your younger guys to use this experience to where they're more comfortable playing in that setting in the future.
We told you last week here on Gamecock Central Radio that Clemson might be the best offensive football team in the country, and I think they backed that up with their performance on Saturday night. So, Wes, there were a couple of Gamecock players said that there were racial slurs directed at them during pregame Saturday night. Dabo Swinney came out the following day on Sunday. He was asked about it, and he said that he asked his team about, did anybody direct racial slurs at any of the Gamecock players? And he said that to a man, they all said no, they didn't. Dabo said he took their word for it. I don't know where we go from here, Wes, but do you have any comment on the racial slur allegations?
It's obviously a very, right now it's one person, their word against South Carolina's word.
Right.
It's a very sensitive topic, obviously. I do know that all I can say on that is that I have, I've known Bryson Allen Williams since he was, maybe a sophomore in high school. And if Bryson Allen Williams says something, then I believe Bryson Allen Williams. So, that's obviously a very sensitive thing and should never be taken. I know. You know how in football games some things are always going to be said. There's going to be trash talk, but obviously that is a line that should never, ever be crossed. So I don't know where you go from here. If, one side said it, the other side denies it, I don't really know where it can go from here. But my initial thought on that was if Bryson says it happened, then it happened.
One Gamecock freshman said after the game that the loss was embarrassing and that South Carolina would have this game circled on the schedule next year. Talk to our fans, Wes. Don't you feel like this is a game that South Carolina should have circled on the schedule every year?
Oh, yeah, it's going to be circled every year. And, I think that ultimately, other than the racial stuff, because that's, to me, that's, like I said, that's crossing a line.
Yeah.
But the other stuff, just the game is circled, disrespected, all that stuff. That's talk. That's just typical rivalry stuff, and the game should be decided on the field. And if Clemson wants to call timeouts late, and they're just crushing South Carolina, that's their right to do that. So, I've never been into the thing of getting mad over a blowout. So the other stuff, other than the racial stuff, I think if you're South Carolina, yeah, you got to go use it as motivation, but at some, that stuff needs to be handled on the field. But, it's one of those things where, like I said, I've said a couple of different times, I think if it bothers you that bad, I think you do have to, if you're South Carolina, try to use the other parts of that, the disrespected part, the timeouts, all that stuff as motivation for the future. But ultimately, South Carolina is just going to have to play better and get more good players to turn this rivalry around, because ultimately that's what this game was about, is that Clemson has talented guys at every single level of their team, and they also have talented backups in place as well. There was times when Clemson's backups were in and South Carolina's starters were still in, and Clemson is still moving the ball and still getting stops. So, that just goes to, I guess, show you how far off South Carolina is right now.
Yeah, if there's one thing we learned Saturday night, it's just that the Gamecocks have got to get better. That's the simplest way to put it. So, Wes, let's move forward here. Talk about bowl game plans. What do you know about where the Gamecocks might be headed and who they might play in the bowl game?
Yeah, it's been interesting. You had, obviously, Ole Miss losing, but then Vanderbilt wins and gets into the bowl conversation. I've thought that, well, I've sort of hoped for the fan base's sake that it's going to be the Belk Bowl, because I think that would be obviously a good place for South Carolina fans to go. My gut feeling has been that South Carolina ends up in Birmingham Bowl. I'm not going to pretend like I have, some source on this that I can tell everybody what's happening, because I don't at this stage. So, we'll see. I don't want to take that as me like reporting it or anything,
right.
But it seems like Birmingham would make sense when you look at the bowl pecking order at this point. But the bowls are a little bit different this year in that, and they have been the last couple of years, in that the conference, after you get to a certain point, the conference sort of selects where each team is going to go. So they sort of select it to where the matchups make a little more sense than they did when just the actual bowls were selecting who they wanted. So, could South Carolina get, I don't want to say lucky, but could South Carolina be fortunate and go to a better bowl than Birmingham just because there's a better matchup somewhere else, or just because it would make more sense for travel? Because, the Belk Bowl has got to know that South Carolina versus some fairly local ACC team would be very close to a sellout. But I don't know if South Carolina has the resume to make that happen.
Okay. Wes, any chance that the Gamecocks end up playing NC State? South Carolina opens with NC State next year in Charlotte, neutral site game up at the Panther Stadium. Any chance that the Gamecocks and Wolfpack meet in this bowl season?
I think that would be a fun matchup. But, you would think with the fact they're opening with each other next year that as much as the conferences and stuff can sort of choose now who's going where, I wouldn't think they would make that matchup. But, I guess you never know. But to me, it would probably make sense for them to go a different direction because of the fact that they do open up. And they open up on a neutral site next year as well. So essentially, they're playing on a bowl game to open next year versus playing in one this offseason.
Yeah, there's been some talk that it could be, maybe South Carolina, NC State in the Belk Bowl in Charlotte. I've also heard speculation that it could be the Gamecocks and the Wolfpack in the Independence Bowl in Shreveport, Louisiana. But it's all speculation at this point, Wes. And as soon as we have more information on the Gamecocks bowl destination, we will pass it along here on Gamecock Central.
Absolutely, man.
All right, Wes, appreciate your time today.
Sounds good, man. We'll talk to everybody soon.
All right, that's Wes Mitchell, and I'm Emerson Phillips. We'll have plenty more on the Gamecocks bowl destination coming up here on Gamecock Central Radio. Thanks for being with us.